All right, Coach, thanks for joining me today on this Simple Coach to Coach interview. Really do appreciate it, especially since I basically cornered you at the fields at Lehigh, asking for an interview just after a session. So I'm sure that was probably interesting for you, but really do appreciate you taking the time today.
Of course. No, I'm flattered to have been included. So glad to be here.
Excellent. So you've been like the head coach for what, like a whole 4 months at Vassar,
Yep.
or 6 months or something like that?
Yeah, I started at the end of March.
Yeah. Not like you have a season to prepare for in that amount of time, but can you just sort of talk about what your experience has been, how you got to this position, and how you ended up at Vassar, knowing, of course, that I think that journey started somewhere around Ohio Wesleyan.
It did.
Yeah.
Yes. So rewinding a little bit, I played soccer at Ohio Wesleyan. That's where I graduated in 2010. And when I graduated from school, I wasn't completely sure what my path would be at that time. I went in actually working for a few different technology companies for about 4 years. I was working in the IT world, and
oh my gosh!
Yes,
come on in. The water's fine.
And then I kind of had this realization that for me, it wasn't where my passion was, and I'm a sports person, right? I'd always been around sports in some capacity, and I wanted to get back into that. And so I moved back to the Philadelphia area again, which is where I'm from, and started getting involved with some local club soccer. I had some friends that were involved in the game locally, and I started getting involved there and started to kind of move forward from that point. Led to a high school job, and then I started realizing I continued to really enjoy it. And I have a passion though for I think really working with players that are in college. I had a very special experience when I was in college, and it's where I felt that I wanted to be, and so started just trying to get in touch with coaches and try to get into the game at that level. And I was fortunate enough to get an opportunity at a school right outside of Philadelphia at Immaculata University, and it started to lead from there. And I went to St. Lawrence as a graduate assistant, and I was up there for a few seasons, and then from there it took
with Coach Toshak?
I was there with Coach Toshak.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
Yes, yeah, we were there for 3 seasons together. He's a very close friend of mine still. He's a unbelievable coach and person. I was definitely very fortunate to get to work with him for a few years, and that took me then from there. At the end of kind of finishing my master's degree, I went to Colorado for 4 years. So I was out there as an assistant coach at Colorado College. Awesome experience again. Colorado is definitely a place that I think you're not in a rush to leave very often. And, so I was there. And, but yeah, I think the hope was to always maybe come back to the East Coast. My wife and I are both from the Philadelphia area, and was kind of waiting, for hopefully, what would be the right opportunity. And having used to play against Vassar as a coach, the Liberty League, as well stuck out in my mind, but Vassar as an institution definitely, held a place there in my memory. And, when I caught wind of this job becoming available, I wanted to really kind of try and put myself in a good position for it. And I was fortunate enough that it worked out. From there, it was really a no-brainer. So
yeah. But what is it about Vassar, right? Because I know I'm discovering, like in coaching paths, it's really important to select that school to go to for your first head coaching job, but then sort of working your way through. What was it about Vassar itself that you thought, this is a place where I could start my head coaching career in a really positive way?
As I was going through the process of kind of determining, what would be the right fit for me, it almost started to become like a why not Vassar, really.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tremendous institution, right? It's a
Yeah.
tremendous academic institution. The previous coach, Andy Jennings, had been here for, a number of years, has a strong tradition of success on the field. So it's an established program on the field, a tremendous academic reputation.
Mm-hmm.
When looking at the institution from a soccer perspective, it's very well resourced as well as other athletics.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we have tremendous facilities. Um, and then with just talking to the campus community, I really just, I'm a big gut feel guy. You kind of just get that
Yeah, yeah,
feeling that this is
yeah,
where you want to be. And with
yeah.
talking with the student athletes, I just felt like everything was here to be successful, really,
Mm-hmm.
and you kind of just get that feeling that this is the type of student athlete that I would really like to
Mm-hmm.
work with. We have very intellectual, critical thinking,
Yeah.
students. It's a really fun place, and for me, I really wanted to be at a place to really try and just combine a fantastic overall experience. So,
Mm-hmm.
mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it's interesting how closely tied academic success of a school is, or rigor of a school is tied with the success of a soccer program. Um, yeah, and especially in Division 3. Hey, so I do have to ask you this because I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge fan. Um, you're as an Ohio Wesleyan alum. How important was Jay to your sort of soccer slash coaching development?
Jay is amazing, right? I mean, he has, without before I even say anything. I mean, you can just look at what he's done,
Oh,
and
done.
it
Yeah,
speaks for
yeah.
itself, right? But on the level that I was fortunate enough to get to work with him and be a student athlete with him, um, he was also a professor of mine
Yeah.
while there. I mean, it really, I think, ingrained more so that student athlete, relationship for me. He's a
Mm-hmm.
very intelligent person and very, big on connecting with his student
Mm-hmm.
athletes. That was my experience, and I learned a lot into obviously on the field with the tactics, but really a lot about the psychology of the game,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding kind of the more about the experience as a student athlete too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and so it was definitely like it's funny when I think back a lot. There was a lot of success and a lot that happened on the soccer field, which was a lot of fun. But I often think about a lot of the conversations I'd have a lot with just with Jay. He had
Mm-hmm.
a very open door policy for all of his players. It was informal. I was really able to get to know him very well. Um, I like to think that we were really able to establish a good relationship, and
Mm-hmm.
he's been a guy that I've remained in close contact with still. Um,
Yeah. I interviewed him a couple times. I did the long interview and
mhm.
then just this 2022 season preview, and he is a remarkable guy. And I probably at the time, and I'm sure he's evolved, but when he started coaching, some of his ideas were probably, not very common, right? Especially around the psychology of a student athlete.
Mhm.
And yeah, I'm a big fan, even though you guys knocked me unconscious twice in my 4 years.
Mm.
But that's okay. I won't hold it against you. Um, it, do you? I mean, having been in the game for a while, Division 3, do you have a sense as to have players gotten better over the years? Are they smarter players? Are they more technical players? Or do you think, the you in your prime could compete at again, at Ohio Wesleyan, step on the field for a position?
Well, of course, I think I like to think that, right?
You can lie. That's
I
okay.
I mean, I had my work cut out for me when I was a player there myself, right? So
Hmm. Yeah,
in my
yeah.
prime, um, I think I think probably the best way to go about to probably respond to the question is just what you've seen with soccer in this country in general,
Yeah.
and I think really at all levels, the massive steps we continue to take forward, right? I like to think
Yeah.
with coaching and player development, and so you've seen, I think, I mean, the game continuing to improve, right, in
Hmm.
general. And I think Division 3 has certainly continued to improve, just like all levels of college soccer and just soccer in
Hmm.
general. Um,
Yeah.
I think, players are learning more technically. I think they're learning more about, build up play, the way the tactics of the game, kind of the inner workings there.
Hmm.
Obviously, we know a lot more on the sports science element, right? With the,
Hmm.
just
Yeah.
um, players being able to compete at their highest levels too within that.
Hmm.
So, like I said, I think there's just on really when you start to look at the whole aspect of the game, it's continued to rise.
Yeah. Hey, you, I mean, you've had 4 months under your belt
Mm-hmm.
or whatever it is, and right? I mean, season is 3 weeks away. I mean, how much time have you dedicated to sort of starting to build a program that you want to see, and how much time have you been able to focus in on the matters at hand, which is you're going to be playing in 3 weeks?
Mm-hmm. I think I started at a great time. I was very
Mm-hmm.
fortunate. I mean, of course, you always want more time, but I was able to start, in the spring, right before, and we're fortunate we have a non-traditional season, and I got to
Mm-hmm.
be able to start before that. And so I was able to immediately get on the field pretty much with the team,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
for me, that was one of the best ways to get to know everybody and
Mm-hmm.
start to kind of figure out a little bit more where we are and implement some things that are important to me. Um, I've been, I mean, fortunate enough to, I think, try to stay connected with the previous coach, and
Mm-hmm.
I had some be able to kind of pick his brain on things, but also watch a lot of film and um, having been around the Liberty League a little bit, I actually used to compete, for players
Mm-hmm.
recruiting wise with Vassar.
Yeah.
So I think I had hopefully a decent idea, but um, yeah. So I mean, a lot of time. But I guess to kind of answer your question, right? There's been a lot of time trying to get ready here, right?
Yeah.
It's you always feel like there's not enough hours in the day,
Yeah.
and you do the best you can. I feel though like we're in a great place. Been able to hopefully though continue to help kind of figuring out some things to continue to help us reach some new heights. So that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
just really where I am. Um, Starting to plan preseason right now and kind of get those logistics sorted out and really what we're going
Yeah.
to do day in and day out. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah,
When do you start?
August 19th.
Okay. Is that like physicals, like your first time on campus, and then, or is you playing on the 19th?
We start playing the 19th. Everyone moves in on the 18th.
Yeah. Okay. Well. Um. All right. So I have to ask you because it's another. Is there? Do you plan on, or will you have like a leadership group where not just captains, but sort of a broader group to help you sort of stay connected, but also to as act as a support for what you're trying to do. You make sense?
Yes, it does. And so what we already had last year that was in place is there is like a leadership group with a
Mm-hmm.
member from each class that
Mm-hmm.
is on it, in addition to the captains
Mm-hmm.
that we have. And yeah, so I would like to continue that as well as we're also very fortunate. We have a great group of seniors as well on the
Mm-hmm.
team who I also consider kind of like a leadership group as well within
Yeah.
that. Um, but yeah, I think to kind of answer your question, so I do have really, there's the captains, there's just the senior class in
Yeah.
general, but then also a representative within each class too.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Not that you've been able to probably do much in that regard, right? I'm sure
Hmm.
that's
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
yep, to do.
That exactly, right? I know. That's the thing too, and kind of back to even to your previous question, right? Like there's quite a
Yeah,
to-do list, and you're
yeah,
also trying to be recruiting, and you're getting things sorted
yeah,
out
yeah,
for the season,
yeah.
so you're you know, you figure it out, right? But
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, I could just about. I mean, with, when I was like sort of preparing for this, I was looking at when you were hired, and I was sort of like doing a mental calendar, and I'm like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, trying to, because I know how I am, and I think I would just it would be a mad dash from the day I got hired until probably after the season when I could take a breather because I would think the season is the big thing, right?
Mhm.
Obviously, is the
Oh
big
yeah,
thing. So,
yeah. Hmm.
hey, rules questions, right?
Hmm.
Everyone. I'm sure you're aware of the overtime rules.
Yes.
I'm curious. Are you a supporter of those changes of getting rid of overtime in the regular season? And probably more importantly, do you think it will change the way you manage a game?
I think yes to both. Um, I mean, it's interesting when you grow up one way, and yeah, you've always played with overtimes, and but I think what you start to see is when you're adding. I mean, so a lot is poured into 90 minutes already,
Yeah,
and then when you think about adding an additional 20, you often see the quality of the game has really
just
dropped
dropped.
off, right?
Yeah.
And if you start now, I mean, there's, when we talk again, like we mentioned earlier, with this the sports science of it all. If you start, let's say you have what, four overtime games that go the full 20, you're already now adding
Mm-hmm.
an entire another game to your schedule, and let's say
Yeah.
you're playing, so now instead of playing, it could end up being what, five games in a short period of time, so it's
Mm-hmm.
starts to really add up, and you put
Mm-hmm.
a lot more minutes on everybody.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about, so I think for that standpoint, no, it definitely does. Like I'm a proponent of that change. I think it just
Mm-hmm.
allows us to manage the load on players much better, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think when you look at how it influences the game, yeah, well, it's not in your mind anymore, right?
Yeah.
You're not thinking about, okay, is this realistically going to go to overtime? If so, how are we going to adjust, right? Do you have to make more substitutions? Are you trying to give players an extra rest? How are you addressing that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Depending on how the game might be going, are you starting to, you know, are you dropping off? Are you trying to push the tempo earlier? It just depends, right? Like that all gets
Mm-hmm.
pushed more forward now as a
Mm-hmm.
result. Maybe now at the
Mm-hmm.
70th minute or the 75th minute, are you changing tactics a little sooner? Are you,
Yeah.
um, so there's definitely a different approach within that,
Mm-hmm.
I think. It'll be interesting to see what it does to a lot of results. I haven't
Yeah.
looked at the statistics, but I wonder how many games were often decided by overtime.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to see how many more draws now we have during the course of
Yeah.
the season, how that affects win percentages and everything. But
Yeah. Yeah. Forget who I was talking to, and they said if they look back on the last year, they would have 5 ties.
yeah.
Like the games that went into overtime, and they weren't even looking at the results, there would be 5 ties. And I
Hmm.
thought, huh. And I just think what that does for like tournaments and getting into your conference tournament and the
Exactly.
NCAA's, like
Hmm.
that's gonna I'm glad I'm not at that table. Like I just
Yeah, the
it's
conversation
that'll
even get that much trickier now, right?
yeah, yeah,
It's tough. If I was to think too, is that if you have, let's say, two games in 3 days, and you're adding an extra half of
oh
soccer onto that, it just
yeah,
becomes so challenging, right?
yeah.
And it's so, but
Like
yeah.
I've said it before, I just remember my days, like even because it was the mid 80s, and so your training was like you had 2-a-days, and you did physical
Mm-hmm.
fitness in the morning, and I remember just the first game, and legs were not like were numb, like you
Mm-hmm.
couldn't, they just, because you've just beaten them so much. I could just imagine over the course of a season that way. And the other thing, I was like, why can't, what a great thing is if you could just add a week either at the front or the back of a season. Just an
Mm.
additional week. Not saying you can increase the number of games you can play, but just 1 week. And it gives you enough to maybe have one game a week a couple times instead of two right in the middle of the season. So,
Yeah,
because I
just
do
more
think,
time to manage that load, right?
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's it. Because I do think, especially like you mentioned, the science I think is getting to be pretty clear. What an athlete has to go through, a soccer player goes through in the course of a season, where and what it does to the body, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I loved the game. I thought it was a great game. The final, the national final, right?
Mm-hmm.
Connecticut Amherst. I thought it was a fantastic game. But it was a fantastic game in spite of the fact that all of those guys looked like they were cobbled together, band-aid, bandaged, holding together, like
Mm-hmm.
force of will trying to play, right? Like there was no freshness to it. It was just a downright brawl because I don't think those guys had it in them anymore, at that point, right? So,
Yeah, no, it's a long,
yeah.
yeah, it's a lot of minutes it adds up to
Yeah.
be on them, right?
Yeah.
So,
So, all right. So what's your first day of training going to look like in 3 weeks, 2 weeks, whatever it is? Like, what does that first day look like? Do you play? Do you? I mean, do you jump into running? Whatever it is. Like, are you? Is it more? Hey, let's get the ball rolling, or?
so still kind of mapping that out a little bit with you to be fair. We're going
Yeah.
through each day actually right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're trying to, it's a couple of things. One is, yeah, you're flushing out a little bit, right? I mean, it's the opening day, everyone's excited, they want to get going. And we have some guys too that there's some decent travel with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to get the balls moving, right? I would like to play, um, but I think it just depends on like where we're at. I mean, there's also
Mm-hmm.
trying to get a baseline too for where we are and kind of also
Mm-hmm.
what we can do that first
Mm-hmm.
day. Um, so to be fair, I mean, I'm still kind of piecing it together on what exactly it'll look like. I remember growing
Mm-hmm.
up, it was always cool when yeah you would play on the first day, um,
Mm-hmm.
and I love that too.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of in two minds still about
Mm-hmm.
it as we're continuing to kind of finalize those plans for
Yeah.
us,
Yeah.
um, and what's going to be most effective kind
Mm-hmm.
of going forward. Because with the preseason, it's really so short, and a
Yeah.
lot of it is we're immediately trying to hit the ground running and be preparing for that first game too.
Yeah.
So you're
Yeah.
trying to quickly figure out where we are,
Yeah.
um, and what's going to be most beneficial for us to then get ready for that first game. So
Yeah.
I
I guess
apologize if it's kind of evasive a
no.
little bit, but I just don't
Yeah.
really have a better answer for you right now.
So evasive. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. No. Well, that makes sense, right? And I think probably no. I mean, you tell me. And not to say that you're the new guy, but just being the new guy, your first season with these guys that you have some experience with in the spring, but now you're bringing in a crop of freshmen, and it's obviously the fall is very different, and you want to see fitness and you want to see all those things. So I'm sure there's some of it too is about getting your arms around what it is do I have here as a what am I the games will sort themselves out, but I have to understand who are my players, where can they play, what can they do, what all those
Hmm.
things, right? In a little bit more concrete way. I'm sure that presents itself
Yeah,
with some
and that's what's
problems.
nice too. I mean, we do have a couple of scrimmages mixed in
Mm-hmm.
during our preseason, which are also great opportunities to kind of figure out things as well and where
Mm-hmm.
we're at. So there's definitely a lot of opportunities to play. It's
Mm-hmm.
just in terms of like what that first day is, that's why it's kind of
Yeah.
figuring out what's going to make the most sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Do you have a sense as to what sort of upperclassmen you're going to be looking to really step up, or in order for you to whatever you have in your mind as to what success is going to be, do you have some guys that you think really need to sort of come into their own and be leaders on the field?
Yes, for sure. I think that's always the case. I know, especially with college sports, right? When players are graduating and you're getting ready for the next class, that's time for the next group. There's a lot more minutes that are now available. That a lot of minutes graduated, right? And um, there could be some players that maybe didn't play as many minutes that are now going to be. There's a lot of opportunity out there, and so there is definitely. Um, it'll be an exciting preseason. I think in a very exciting season.
Mm-hmm.
I I love the group and where we are, and it's going to very much be though. There'll be opportunities for guys,
Mm-hmm.
and we need people to step up. And we had a lot of seniors that graduated, and so there's opportunities for guys to really come in and step into roles and you know make their stamp on things, right? Continue
Mm-hmm.
things going forward. So for
Mm-hmm.
sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Um, well, do you have in mind do you have any games that are circled in big and bold that you're like this? Maybe not so much a game or games that sort of will define who you are, all that crazy stuff, but more in terms of like, you know, this will be a good measure, or if we, like if our performance, if we go well, we could go in if it goes well, we can definitely, we're in the driver's seat of our conference or what have you. I don't ask easy questions, do I?
Yeah, that's a yeah, that's a look. There are. Well, man, of course, I can't wait to get up there and play St. Lawrence, right? I gotta have Coach
Yeah.
Toshak circled on the schedule, But but yeah,
That's
no, I
going to be a
mean,
fireworks session right there.
but and I think this kind of question, probably what comes to mind when you talk about scheduling and these kind of things is when you work back to just with what you've seen in Division 3, right? And I mean, every game, like you're in it,
Hmm.
like, and when I think about our conference, like the conference is so tight, right, top to bottom, and no, yeah, I mean, yeah, yeah, for me, it's not being able to circle one more than the other.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
and I try to really boil this down for every game, right? It's the next one is where
Yeah.
our primary focus goes to. Um, and I'm not just trying to again like have the safe answer or say that for you, but that's really what it comes down to a lot for me,
Yeah.
especially in soccer, right? In our
Yeah.
game,
Yeah.
right? Like we need to be ready to bring it and be
Yeah.
tight on everything. Um, it's just the reality of our sport too.
Yeah.
So
I'm the guys I've talked to so far and the coaches. I find it interesting now that I think for a while it was like, yeah, you win the conference, you get the golden ticket to the
mhm.
tournament. And I think a lot of coaches are like, yeah, that's not so easy anymore. So now I got to
Mm-mm.
do what's the other route? Strength of schedule. How do I get strength of schedule? Well, I got to play some of the better teams. And so, like, it is true to a certain extent. You're like, I can't circle any which one. It's every game, game for game. How is it going to turn out? How are we going to do? And I mean, that's the crazy evolution of the game that I've seen, especially
Well,
collegiately.
exactly, and that's it. I mean, because when you're looking at the criteria that goes into all of that with the selection process, it's
Hmm.
and you have the win percentage, but you also have the SOS, and you have the win, the regionally ranked opponents,
Yeah,
and everything. Every game is
yeah,
massive because it all flows into the same criteria, right?
yeah,
So I think that's what really makes that question hard to kind of pull one out more. I mean, yeah, maybe in your mind as the season's going, right? This will be an interesting test for
yeah.
us, but right now, I'm not there right now, right?
Yeah. No, well, to your point, like it's that first one. I gotta believe, right? Like your first
Yes,
competitive game, right, in a regular
yes,
season has got to
hmm
be that'll be interesting, right? Like,
exactly,
wow, what
exactly.
is all this work, whatever we've done over the last has it materialized into anything that makes sense, right? Like, because
Hmm.
um, anyhow, all right. So, I mean, I hate to ask you these questions, right? Because it's like like what's your what I should have done a better job with these, but what what's like your biggest concern for the team? Not so much the opponents, because that ultimately that takes care of itself, but like what are the things that you think can have the biggest impact on the team as you're going into, like I said, your first season at the helm, right? Like, is there, I mean, are you concerned about fitness? Is there something psychological that you think, oh my gosh, if we do this right, they can, we can go really far, or it's going to be a short season?
I think coming in my position right now, I don't think there's like a major concern in that regard that I'm thinking about. Well, I think in any transition time, you just want to get off on the right foot,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you just want to, I think, um, we're making some changes. We're doing some things different tactically. We're doing, there's a lot of teaching that's involved. There's a lot of um, just that goes into being ready to go, right, for the start. So I think, and I wouldn't describe it as a concern by any means. It's just like where's that large emphasis, I
Mm-hmm.
guess, on really what's going to be important for us to be successful sooner rather than later is just, yeah,
Yeah.
look, we're gonna be learning, we're gonna be, you know, getting better, and you gotta just stick to the process, right? And we're gonna be
Mm-hmm.
good. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, just kind of like I guess that's just part of a natural transition, as I guess where I'd
Mm-hmm.
say, and kind of the what kind of comes with that, right?
Yeah. Did you mentioned sort of you mentioned tactics there? Do you? I mean, how much, I don't want to say how many tactical changes, but like how much of what you've been doing or you've done in the spring and you want to continue doing has focused on tactical, like what how you view you want to play the game? Is it really heavy because you want to totally change the way they're doing things, or we're doing things, or I mean, did you find a little bit the transition is not that difficult because what how you want to play is very similar, you know? I don't know if that makes sense, but
Hmm. And so I felt um, when I was looking at this position in general, I was, and kind of back to the earlier conversation of, yeah, I mean, coaching against Vassar and had been recruiting players, kind of competing for players with Vassar. I, I guess I was hoping that, and I like to think that um, I had a decent idea for the types of players they were going after and how they like to play, which I felt would help with the transition too.
mm-hmm.
I have a similar approach to the game for sure than what they've been having success with and kind of how they've been playing. And so to kind of answer your question, there's not like I'm not trying to, I mean, what Coach Jennings has been doing here for years. Like it's, no, I'm definitely not trying to be counterproductive to try and overhaul everything by no
Yeah,
means.
yeah.
That's what I'm trying to do, right? So it's um, really just putting in more so some things that are important to me and kind of how I view the game and approach it. So there is some tactical focuses that are going on
Hmm.
in certain areas, and um, but but more minor stuff, right?
Hmm.
I guess I would
Yeah.
say it's probably the best way to kind of answer that.
Hmm. Yeah, that always intrigues me on the old coach, new coach.
Hmm.
How much change happens, because I think sometimes that ends up being the most unsettling thing for a player, right? Like, hey, I've known how to play this way for so long, and now you're
Hmm.
throwing a wrench in it, right? Um,
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, yeah, so I mean, hopefully, yeah, I don't think anything is going to be too drastic by any means, right?
yeah,
With what
yeah,
we're
yeah,
doing. So,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't. I think everyone's smart enough to know that that's the last thing you want to do, right? It's like throwing a hand grenade in the middle of in the middle of a room, right? If you come in and you overhaul
mhm,
everything, your possibility of success, I think it's narrower and narrower,
mhm,
right? Like
mhm.
just by its nature.
Yeah,
Um, is it maybe we could shift over to some recruiting questions, just to
yeah.
yeah, this will um, do you I mean, obviously in the past, but maybe now too. Are you familiar with the websites that the recruiting websites? They get somebody like me to pay, and they get my son's, face all over the place. Do you use those, or have you used those in the past?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And you have any thoughts on it? Are they good, bad? It is a curiosity question, just because I'm always trying to figure out angles on how they do this stuff and if it's worthwhile.
Hmm. No, I think it's all good. Like I think
Hmm.
for me, it's more exposure, right? And it's trying to I mean, it's, I guess if I was in the position of the student athlete, it's more opportunity to put yourself in a position for success, right? To
Hmm.
identify and find the school that's important to you, right? I've speaking now on this side of the desk, like I mean, you find players in many different ways, right? Whether it's a recruiting service, whether it's when an alum happens to see a player somewhere, right? You're
Hmm.
just going to tournaments and watching, um, whatever it might be. So and I think the reality, and this is kind of another thing that probably speaks back to an earlier conversation, is the game as it continues to develop in our country. Like there are so many good players, there are so many good teams, and it's everywhere in our
Yeah.
country. And I can't get everywhere, right? Like that's just the reality of it. And so you really do rely in a way on a lot of services and references and connections to help bridge that gap where you can,
Hmm.
right? And possibly make your search too more targeted. Like
Hmm.
maybe it helps to know about certain events where there's a lot of interest in your school, right?
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
well. So that's how I would, I mean, to kind of answer your question there, that's how I feel about a lot of the
Yeah.
services that are out there.
Do you have a preferred method? Like, what in the ideal scenario of a kid? Like, would it be, hey, I saw him at a game, and then I saw him at a camp, and then he came to a Vassar ID camp. Do you have a preferred way of how that would work, or are you pretty much open to any way and for player to get in front of you, video and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think the preferred method, and again, it's not a perfect science, right? But yeah, usually I like to hear from the player ideally before an
Hmm.
event. Um, I go out there, I register for a lot of an event that I'm considering going to, and I'll hear from a recruit. Ideally, they'll have a short highlight video
Mm-hmm.
to give me an idea for the kind of player they are. We'll have a little bit of correspondence back and forth, um, and then I can see them play with their team at a tournament. Um, excuse me, or it could be at a camp, whatever have you. I mean, it's really, just trying to see them play in person is always important for me if possible. I
Mm-hmm.
realize again that's not always possible though.
Mm-hmm.
Like it could be where there's ways to fill in the gaps there if needed. With fortunately, a lot of teams now like to film full
Film.
games
Yeah.
that they can
Yeah.
send me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but back to the original question, I'd like to see them play in person with their team, and then even still, I'll usually follow up. If it to ask for a full game too,
Mm-hmm.
just to try and get a larger sample
Yeah.
of maybe that player and be able to find consistencies and just for everything. But that's kind of how I'd like to ideally evaluate a player.
Yeah. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, what are you're a fan of showcase tournaments?
Yep, absolutely.
There's a proliferation. It's like an industrial complex of showcase tournaments coming from a parent's perspective. However,
Yeah.
I mean, do you like those? Do you select a few, or are you just sort of like an equal opportunity attendee?
And so this is where it gets hard, right? Because again, like you're saying, there's so many, and we
Yeah,
only can go to so many, right?
yeah.
So I usually try to target. Um, I try to get to each region of the country if I can in a year.
Mm-hmm.
Given at a school like where we are at Vassar, we have a very nationwide presence
Mm-hmm.
on the recruiting front. So I try to get out to every region if I can during the course of the year. So it's identifying an event in each region, um, and really I try to do the best homework I can before the event to see what's going to make the most sense for us, though,
Mm-hmm.
right? With the teams that are going, what's the league of the event? How have we done there in the past, right? Um, those kind of details
Mm-hmm.
beforehand.
Yeah.
But then always, yeah, if it doesn't work out, I do always try to host a couple of ID camps as well, to just ensure that we can find hopefully opportunities to see players that way
Mm-hmm.
too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I would think Vassar has a. You're not a regional school, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
like you appeal to a much broader audience, probably across the country, if not the world. But do you go out to like the West Coast for events, or
Yes.
you do?
Mm-hmm.
You do. Okay.
Yeah. We're just out there a few weeks ago in
Mm-hmm.
California.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, we have a very large. I think we have a good number of players that come from California.
Yeah.
Um, players from all across the country,
Yeah.
right? Chicago,
Yeah.
Texas, obviously a very heavy presence over here in the
Yeah.
tri-state area, but yeah, really everywhere.
Everywhere.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. That's
hmm
what like I said. That's what I figured. Just because Vassar is Vassar, right? And actually, a
hmm
very very close friend of mine is on the board of trustees at Vassar.
Okay.
And he's in California. So I
Oh,
think
okay.
that's like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah. Um, so talk. Are, do you mentioned the ID camps? Do you put an emphasis on ID camps? Like I've gone through the motions of some coaches are like ID camp all the way. Like that's where they try to get kids to go to ultimately. Is that the way you see it, or do you view it as more of, hey, if you want us to see you, here's an opportunity?
I would say the latter
Mm-hmm.
there. Um, no, it's an additional opportunity. Is there a lot of there's a lot of benefit to it for me in
Mm-hmm.
that a prospect gets to see campus as well. Um, you know, we're able to interact, right? coach the player, so you're able to get to do a bit more than you would just kind of watching a game from the sideline at a distance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but again, I think there's many ways and opportunities and so many events out there that I think that it just kind of happens to be wherever makes the most sense
Yeah,
to
yeah,
see somebody,
yeah.
right? And the location and the travel that's also involved in to get back for a camp,
Mm-hmm.
and the distance and the cost. So it just depends on what makes the most sense, really.
Yeah,
That's how I
yeah,
approach it.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That yeah, the distance and the cost,
Yeah.
after a while, right? That's
Yeah.
hey, hey, what do, do you have any thoughts on high school soccer? I know you can't. It's probably really difficult for you to see high school games just because
Mm-hmm.
of the seasons, but um, coincide. But do you have any thoughts on the high school game? Do you like it? Do you not like it?
I loved playing high school soccer
Yeah.
growing up. It was a very big part of my childhood. I always think back for. I think you've started to see things evolve a bit, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm a huge proponent though of playing high school soccer if if that's what makes the most sense for that player. I mean, I think there's a lot of benefit that comes with it. What I always like, and you also can get this for sure in club environments, right? Um, and you're playing meaningful games. But I think what's always a little different with high school is that the crowds,
Yeah.
right? And you're playing in front of your friends.
Yeah.
And there's a little different element that kind of comes with that as well,
Yeah.
right? Which I think is always interesting. Um, so I think, I mean, do I get to see many high school games? No, unfortunately not. Usually, the heavy emphasis for our recruiting is in club, right?
Mm-hmm.
And um, just happens to be how it works out for us.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, I mean, look, I was a three-sport athlete. I loved high school soccer. I'm a big proponent of
Yeah.
it, right? I think there's definitely a lot of value that comes with that too, for
Yeah.
sure. So,
I definitely think from an emotional standpoint, it's probably the most realistic soccer environment that kids would can play in. And this isn't a rip or anything like that, but I always say club soccer is kind of sanitized, right?
mm,
It's right like you don't have necessarily crowds. You have family, your parents,
hmm
or whoever drove you. Whereas at, like you said, a high school game, depending on the game, there could be, a lot of students out there. Some of the games here in New Jersey, Scotch Plains, Westfield, I mean, these are some
yeah,
classic games. There are like 5,000 students and people in the area. Like, that is awesome. Like, the soccer is
yeah, it can,
secondary, right?
yeah,
Like, the game itself
yeah,
is secondary at that point.
it can just be a different atmosphere to kind of
Yeah,
get used to playing into, right? Like you said, there
yeah,
can be a big crowd. It's a 7 p.m. game under the
yeah,
lights.
yeah,
You're playing a rival. It could be different than a 9 a.m. Saturday morning game.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
just dependent on it. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, like you said, it's a great opportunity for everyone. It's just more soccer too,
yeah.
right? Which is always awesome.
Yeah, that's
So,
it. That's it. Hey, speaking of high school players, like what do you see as the biggest gap between a high school player that an incoming freshman, let's say, and what they actually experience collegiately? Um, right, like because they haven't played in the collegiate environment, so there's got to be whether it's just tactical awareness or speed or all that. Like, what is that? What do you see as that gap?
I would say the pace of play is generally the if I had to try and pick one, that would be it. Um, I think, yeah, I mean, soccer is soccer, right? Still a lot. I mean, there's tactics that players are learning at all levels and ages,
Mm-hmm.
and I think you're developing your technique and all those things at levels and ages. But when I think about the pace of the play, um, yeah, it's like, again, when you make that jump at any level, right? And you go to another level higher, the players become faster, stronger, bigger. The game moves faster, right? Are you able to um, adjust by having to play, under pressure more?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you only can take 2 touches instead of 4, right? Are you taking the ball on a half turn? Are you able to see where the next pass is quicker, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of thing. So that's always, I think, something that generally takes a little bit more adjustment to
Mm-hmm.
than other things initially. And it can be like the same thing when you feel, let's say you're going from JV to varsity in high
Yeah,
school,
yeah. Good point. That's
or
a great point.
if you're going from college soccer, maybe then into the professional environment, same thing, right? It
Yeah.
just so
Yeah, that's a good
yeah.
point. That's a great point about JV varsity. Like that,
Mm-hmm.
that's true. Like your JV game is nothing like the varsity game. It just by
Mm-hmm.
nature, right? By definition, and hey, let me. I'm just gonna jump back and because I just um I just thought of something. Like where I guess based on where you're at now, how long like when will you see yourself at a place, or do you have a sense as to when you would see you want to see yourself at a place where you're like, the Vassar soccer program is built, designed, established the way you want it to be, right? Because you're doing things, you're adding your own flavor, all these things. Like, how long do you think that would take, or that you hope to be? I want to be comfortable in a year, or 3 years, whatever that. Did that make sense?
It does. It's a hard question to answer,
Yeah.
too. I think I hope I'm there now, right?
Yeah.
Like I, I think, look, that's just part of that transition thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think it's hopefully trying to make it as quick as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Get to know it. And I think a lot of that, and hopefully I'll start by getting here in the spring, starting to try and help that. Get to know the players quicker, get to know the players better, right? I've been trying to get ingrained in what's going on here on campus, get to
Mm-hmm.
know the campus community better. And I think the quicker I can get to just know everyone, right? I think I'll get on the field this season now again, and it's really putting more things that are important to me on the field in place.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Definitely helps. I think it's hard to give you a time frame because the way I view it is that, like, no, I'm here with players right now that are Vassar soccer,
Yeah.
Vassar men's soccer, and that's the role that I'm in now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's um, I don't kind of view it as like, hopefully in 4 or 5 years, like, no, I want to be there right now,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and hopefully we are.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of probably the best way I could answer it. I
Yeah.
mean, if that helps.
Yeah, 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 totally. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I'm just trying to think, like,
I'm just that's the part these are the weird things I think about is like as a new coach, like how long does it take, like how long does it take to really have the stamp on the program being like this is, and I don't, you can define it any which way, but this is my program or this is Vassar. And I do think it's a really difficult question to ask, and some have said like never, because it's never a complete, right. You change course, like anything, but
well, that could be interesting too, right? Because I
yeah,
mean, you're always evolving
yeah,
on the same token,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like you are the whole. I mean, I think the hope is, I guess, too. It's like I am now just joining
Mm,
Vassar Soccer, and I'm immediately a part of it now,
yeah,
right? And I think all the players are a part of it. When you're here, and then it's like that's just who we are now,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
this is
yeah,
who we are.
yeah, 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 yeah.
It's and I think that's just kind of like probably what happens in a lot of aspects of life, right? Is that now then you transition into something, and this is now who we are, what we're doing, and kind of where we're going,
you
right?
sort of assimilate everything and be like, yay, Vassar, right? Like,
yeah, and it's like, and that's kind of, I think what's so great is that, about just with college sports and a lot of things, right? But
all right, so not the last question again. Because I had some notes that I took. Did you, when you came on board, was your recruiting class pretty much set? Was there, or were you
yes.
you still had? Yeah, it was. So you have okay. And do you have a sense as to how that class is? Do you, do you envision or is it you just sort of like best players win out? Like, do you have a sense as to whether some freshmen are going to compete for spots or get on the field right off the bat and contribute this season?
The way I view it is Coach Jennings, Andy Jennings, and the previous staff, like this class was recruited like every class, right? And with who can come in here and help the team, right? And help the team be successful. And that's my approach with it. They are coming in. Now they're on the Vassar men's soccer team, and I think kind of just my approach usually is, like when I'm evaluating the player, like the team, right? I try to be making decisions that are around the team, right? And objective with what's going to help us be successful, right? And it's not always it's not a question of, age or anything, right? It's how's everyone playing and the consistency and all those. There's a lot of variables to it. But so I haven't even for me I guess that's just how I'd answer that.
Just again another one of those curious things, like again that whole transition thing is really intriguing to me. So all right, I promise no more questions here. Coach, I really do appreciate you taking the time. I'll be following. I'm really do appreciate it, and I'll be cheering you on from here. And maybe, who knows, there's a chance that we might show up on campus on Friday because we're doing this route to a couple schools.
Oh, okay.
So might stop by.
Well, great.
Yeah.
Well, let me know.
All right. So thank you. Thank you very much for your time. Wish you all the best, all the luck, and hopefully we can connect again soon.
Of course. Well, hey, thank you so much. Again, I was honored to get to jump on here, right? I really appreciate you asking me.
Oh,
right?
Thanks.
It's fun getting to talk to you.
Yeah.
So thank
appreciate it. Love talking the game. So,
Absolutely.
So, all right, Coach.
Well, thank you.